Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 8:30 here in the East Coast, and we are going to start. We have, well, a lot of people, which is great. My name is Alon Zaibert, for those of you who don't know me. And as the session is going to be about 20 minutes, and then we're going to leave some 10 minutes for questions. If you want to ask questions during the session, please raise your hand. I'm going to lower everybody's hands right now, but raise your hand if you want to ask a question, or you can use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen, and I will look at it as we go along. So my name is Alon Zaibert, as I mentioned, and I have been in the industry for about 13 years. In the corporate world, I came from the technology world, ran a startup out of Israel, then moved to the US, have been selling technology to different companies in the US for years, and to travel management companies in the US. And then the last almost 3 years, I've worked for Travel Leaders Corporate and managed their sales team, and got passionate about relationship building, trust establishment, and learning a lot about the US culture, the American culture, how to sell in the US. And I managed the sales team, and I was, I guess I can say that I've been pretty successful in the last few years of what I've done, who I sold to, etc. I'm not going to read off of the slides. This is not how I believe we should deliver slides. So you can read yourself. I am all about emotional relevance. It is a key factor when you sell, when we sell something as complicated as corporate travel, which is primarily service and technology and a product and everything else. And so emotional relevance for me is a key for everything. And my email, my website is here. I'll share my email at the end of the session, of course, if anybody wants to reach out. I left Travel Leaders about a month ago as a combination of wanting to do my own thing and coronavirus. And so I want to start by jumping into the US market, and something that I found along the years to be the biggest thing, if you may, in selling in the US, which has been that it takes time. It simply takes time, okay? And there are two main reasons that I think why. Anybody wants to just raise your hand and guess why does it take time, specifically in the US? Anybody? Take a wild guess. Click the raise your hand button if you want to if you want to take a guess. Nobody has the guts to take a guess. All right. We will we have a couple. No? You took your hands down. All right. Let me tell you what I think. There you go. Amlan, go ahead. Why do you think it takes time?
Because of the culture of accountability, it just needs to go through a long decision-making process. And in my previous life, I was in client services, so that was one of the primary reasons. But the sales cycle just lasted for weeks or months.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you, Amlan. I appreciate it. I think you're absolutely right. It's a long sales cycle. What I did is I broke it down to two elements, right? The first one is the right distribution channel. I've worked with many technologies, with many companies who are trying to figure out which is the right distribution channel. After all, this is how we're going to get our service out and scale it. The second thing is trust. And to build trust, it is exactly because by nature we're selling something complicated. Amlan is absolutely right. It takes time because it's a relationship. Okay, and I'm going to mention it throughout the session again and again. It's a relationship, and when you sell a relationship, it simply takes time. So let's break it down even further. The right distribution channel. Again, I've seen many companies and many technologies that are looking and identifying and taking the wrong step into the right channel of distribution, which is the essence of everything that you're doing, basically, if you think about it. And there are others, but I've identified 4 main distribution channels here in the US. The TMCs, the travel management companies, okay? The online booking tools, the different online booking tools, the expense systems, and the corporations themselves. The key is to understand the DNA of each one of these players, right? What drives each one? Who is their customer? How committed are they to the process of helping you, right? And the value you bring them. You need to map the players. And let me share with you a quick story. I assume most people here heard of TripAction. But a few years ago, I worked for a technology company called Atris Technology, which has, you know, I truly believe that their mantra is the right one, right? They created an online booking tool that basically consolidates a lot of different content sources, NDC, and everything else, and makes it the UI, the UX much easier for the user if it's the traveler or the travel agent. But they went after the TMCs as their distribution channel. The problem with TMCs, if you know the history of the market, is that the TMCs are their DNA, they're not innovative, they're not technologically savvy. So they can sell flight, hotel, and car, but anything else is hard for them because the DNA, and we don't need to go to that, that's a different session right now. But they went after the TMCs because logically they said, oh, the TMCs are selling to hundreds and thousands and millions of travelers. They can just, you know, use that and sell. And they have been struggling, okay, a lot because of that. TripAction basically did the same thing, but realized very quickly in their history that the TMCs are not going to be the good distribution channel for them because of the reasons I mentioned. And so they pivoted and they went after the corporations, okay? And they're scaling like crazy, okay? I see we have a question. Mr. Guy Aron, please, you are unmuted. Guy, did you raise your hand to ask a question? Guy going once, Guy going twice. All right, I'm just going to continue. So the other element is events, and events that are happening in the market, because you want to market your message. You want to position yourself, your services, your values into the market. And it's crucial to know which event to go to, right? Are you going to the GBTA, which is the largest event of the year, but are you going to get the most bang for your buck in such an event? Maybe it's better for you to go to a ProTourCon event, which is smaller, but has, you know, different people coming in there, and you get more intimate and better traction. So it's also important to understand which events happen when, who participates in the DNA of each event as a channel of distribution. Okay? So feel free again to raise your hand if you have any questions or send questions. Now, let's talk about trust. Look, I mentioned earlier, it's a relationship, and you need to look at it as such. Usually, you will not get directly to the right person. This is why you need to identify your champion, right, as a first step. Here's the interesting thing, though. To identify the champion, it doesn't mean that your champion is the decision maker, right? And from my experience, these take time. Now, if you know somebody who knows somebody, great. They usually will open the door for you. And it may, you know, shortcut the process a little. But you need to get to the decision maker. So you need to build trust with the champion, which takes time, who then will share with you who are the players and who is the right decision maker. Remember, we're not selling a product. We're not selling off-the-shelf cups or, you know, plates. We're selling service. It's a relationship. It takes time, right? Your champion will be able to map for you And here's an interesting tip as well. Ask. A lot of people that I've worked with are afraid to ask. So feel free to ask. The next kind of 2 steps in the process that I've drew on here are, find out what moves them. And this is a bit tricky because it's not always savings. It's not always just dollars that moves them, right? There could be additional things like be unique to their customer, offer services that make their customer look better, right? Maybe show some sexiness in the market to get some attention and positioning. So revenue or savings is not always the driver. The next step is to understand their supply chain, right? What do I mean by that? Who will be involved? If you're selling to the corporation, if you're tag teaming with the corporation as your channel of distribution, right? Is finance involved? Is the procurement involved? Is the travel manager involved? IT? Which one of them, right, is driven by what within the organization? And if you're going with the TMCs, right, are the agents involved? How do you impact their operation, right? Is operation department involved? What is their driver, right? And when you're selling to an OBT, same thing. Concur is the largest one in the US, but there are other players coming up. Understand their background, understand what drives them. So understand the supply chain of each and every one of them. The next step, ladies and gentlemen, is you want to show a clear path. And what do I mean by that? You want to almost feed them with the process. And I'm going to talk about process later as well. The American culture in general, and I don't like generalizing, but in general, built on process. To manage 320 million people, you have to have process. It's something that is embedded within the American society since birth, right? My kids here in the daycare, let me tell you, I saw it from a very, very young age, right? So you want to show them a path, a clear path, end to end. No small letters. Just show, here's the path, here's what we expect, here are the goals, here's when we get to a proof of concept, here's how it's going to look like. Be as transparent as possible. And the last one is be there. Remember, we are establishing trust, right? We're establishing trust. So when you are there, every time they need you, every time they call, every time something happens, every time you are there for them emotionally as well because of their needs, right? This is how you'll establish trust. Now, here's the interesting piece, ladies and gentlemen, right? This is a minimum 5-6 months process, and it could go to easily a year. When I worked with Atris for a year and a half, we've had weekly calls with one of the largest TMCs in the world, weekly calls for a year and a half before we implemented something there. A year and a half. Taught me a lot, but still it was a year and a half, right? So be aware that it takes time. And one thing is important for me, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I want to mention it here for everybody, wherever you are, whoever you're selling to, or whoever you're developing a relationship with, people as people will always remember how you made them feel, okay? And this is why in the previous slide, if you notice, to create trust for me is 3 main elements: stand out, make an impact, get personal, right? All right. Some important pointers about the US and why it is important to know how to speak American and not necessarily just English. First of all, again, it is a relationship. Mind you, if you noticed in the previous slide with the process, I did not mention technology. A lot of technology companies are trying to sell in the US, focusing on the technology. The best technology in the world, ladies and gentlemen, is technology that you don't even know is there. Technology is never a problem. Every time I hear a third-party technology company that tells me, oh, we can integrate it, no problem. API will do it in 2 hours. I know you can, but the technology is not an issue. The challenge is their time to identify a project manager, a focal point, to get the right team, and to blend it in their own business challenges as well. It's never the technology. So get it out of your mind, right? The technology is the easiest part. Be aware of their process, their time, their organizational culture. And in general, the US culture, again, in general, I still don't like generalizing, but I will still say that in general, the US culture is geared more towards the package. Wherever you are in the world, wherever you are from in the world right now, you know what I'm talking about. The American culture is geared towards the package, the UI, right? The way it looks, the way it feels. Where other countries, other cultures are more geared towards the technology, towards, oh, we'll add another feature, the back end. The front end is not as important. Keep in mind the package is super important for the American culture. 2, learn how to speak American. What does it mean? Doing business in Atlanta, for example, is very different than doing business in New York City, and it's very different than doing business in Kansas City, Missouri. Okay, and by the way, very different than you doing business from Kansas City, Missouri to Kansas City, Kansas, right? There's some local slangs, local ways of doing business in different areas. US is not one entity. So use a local assistance if you can, right? Notice your correspondence style, how you write the email, how you talk on the phone. It takes time, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, I've seen way too many third-party technology companies that I have helped here that screwed things up because the way they came across, okay? If you want to learn how to speak American, it takes time. Remember, it's a relationship, right? And you need to learn that when you're in Alabama, you better understand what roll tide means, okay? And when you are in Boston, you want to know what Jimmy's mean when you go ask for ice cream and Jimmy's. And in California, they call it soda, where in Chicago, they call it pop. And in Texas, they simply call it Coke. All right? There are a lot of different nuances. So it's always, I always recommend use somebody local, use somebody that is aware of these things. I will just share one quick story about speaking American. A few years ago, I was in Israel with a colleague of mine, American colleague of mine, and we sold to a local TMC in Israel. And we were sitting in a room, and he was speaking in English, in American, and he was talking to the CIO across the table. And the CIO asked him, so how much is the implementation cost? And he said, well, the setup fee is $4,500. And then the monthly fee is, and I noticed immediately that the Israeli CIO stopped listening at that moment. She actually wrote down some things. You see in English, the term 4,500 is 4,500. But in Hebrew, there's no such thing as 4,500. It's 4,500. So in her mind, she thought 45,000. So she started writing a note. But here's the other interesting thing. The Americans will never be rude. And for him to stop talking because he noticed her not listening anymore is considered rude. He would not do it. It's tricky. You got to be there. So use somebody who understands all these things. All right. Understand the process. As I mentioned earlier, the American culture is based on processes. There's a system, right? You don't have to accept it. You can beat around it, but if you understand it, it will help you simply in the process. Do not involve religion unless it is sports. Ladies and gentlemen, sports is a religion here. And like any religion, you should know the foundations when you come here. You should know about the curse of the Bambino, the 85 Bears, that there are no lights at Wrigley Field, and why the Baltimore Colts band kept playing even though somebody stole their team in the middle of the night, and never, ever, ever get caught in Boston wearing a Yankee hat, right? It's a religion here. Sports is a religion. And the last one is win-win. That's the approach here. Win-win. It is the approach. And you need to remember when you come to the table with that approach. We want you to succeed. Both sides win-win. Unfortunately, in some places, it's not always like that. Here in the US, it is primarily so. Ladies and gentlemen, essentially what we're promoting is trust, and trust is a relationship based on emotions and relevancy. All right? So this is my email. If anybody is interested right now, we have 10 more minutes to ask questions. Raise your hand if you want to speak up. Send me a note or send me an email later if you would like to talk to me about anything in the US that I can help with. Please, ladies and gentlemen, we have a few more minutes and this is your time to shine. So don't be shy and raise your hand. Please, there's over 100 people on this call and I want to make sure that I don't miss anybody who raises their hand. So we have one person who raised their hand, Danish or Danish. Please, you are unmuted. Go ahead and how are you?
Hey, sir. Thank you very much, Alon. It was a really nice presentation. My question is,
thank you.
That the sales process could last from 3 months to up to a year or maybe more. So do you think it's like if the pricing of the product is not like very high, then is it worth to engage in that long sale processes? Or you have to consider the pricing of the product as well when getting into the long sales cycle as well?
That's a great question, Danish. Where are you connecting from, by the way?
Well, I'm from Toronto, Canada. Right now, I'm stuck in Ecuador.
Oh, wow. Okay. Thank you for the question. Look, it's more than just that, right? You need to understand your margins on your own business model. But remember, at the beginning of the presentation, I spoke about the distribution channel, right? So you need to understand your, cost of goods sold, if you may, through the distribution channel, right? And make sure that your margins are there. You can have a shorter sales cycle. And by the way, one of my biggest recommendations for a lot of app technologies, etc., is don't look at it as a product, look at it as a feature. Because if you think of it as a product, you're going to spend a lot of time and effort in trying to sell it, where if you look at it as a feature, you're going to look at it as a tag and an add-on to already an established distribution channel, which might shorten your sales cycle, right? So I hope it answers your question, Danish.
Yes, sir. Thank you. It makes sense. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, Camilo Blanco, please go ahead.
Hi, Alon.
Camilo.
Do you hear me well?
Yes. Yes, Camilo. How are you? Where are you connecting from?
I am connecting from Bogota, Colombia.
Oh, wow. Buenos días, señor. Yes, what is your question, please?
Buenos días, Alon. First off, thank you very much for your presentation. Very enlightening. I just wanted to ask you something about the culture, and I had the opportunity to study some courses there, and I was taught that in the US there's no problem like to show off what you have accomplished, either academically or professionally. Whereas in other regions in the world, like here, you might come across as a show off when you champion your accomplishments. So is it true that there is no problem there when you kind of go through every in detail with what you have accomplished, for instance, in a task, in a past job, or in a current job, or in your company with other cases?
Yeah, no, again, overall, Camilo, thank you for the question. But overall, there's no problem. You'll see more in the US people on their titles will add their accomplishments, you know, to the titles, whether it's an MBA, whether it's a GPG, they did a project management like a Six Sigma accomplishment, etc., where other cultures are, it just doesn't seem as important. But the flip side of it is also people here, again, Camilo, I have to tell you, it's different in San Francisco than it is in Georgia, for example, right? But overall, people are, you know, more okay to show up here with what they established. Other people are actually welcoming and cheering for you when you've done it, where some other cultures might be jealous. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, it does.
All right, beautiful. See, we have a few more minutes. Thank you very much, Camilo. Buenos días. And Pak Katisomakul, I hope I said it right. Please, you are unmuted. What is your question?
Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for the presentation. And just having a question about trust. So basically, right, we are a company based in Thailand and trying to sell to the US. But wondering if we are not in the US, can we only like doing an online cold call and do the sale process via online? And is that even possible? Because you said trust, you need to like maybe physically be there. Maybe you need to check hand with them, and just want to get your advice on that.
My advice is, yes, you can, but slim chances to do it just online. Look, I managed a software company for 5 years, started in Israel, and after 3 years moved to the US and ran it for 2 more years here. Company collapsed, fell apart, doesn't matter. But years later, I stumbled in conferences, some people who were my customers, and they saw me and, you know, we hugged because they appreciated the relationship. Now, it was great because now I sold them other things and other services. This is why it's important, and I will tell you, Pak, to use somebody local, whether it's somebody like myself or others, but use somebody local. Otherwise, it will be a big struggle for you. Now, I will say, where there's a caveat, it depends what you're selling. If you're selling something that is, you know, very quick to purchase, you know, not expensive, you know, quick, no need implementation, and it's sold online in 2 clicks, that's a different story, right? I don't know what you're selling. But in general, trust, part of it is being there and hug them, literally hug them, or, you know, be there physically. Make sense, Pak?
Makes sense, Alon. Thanks so much for the answer.
Of course, thank you, anytime. Feel free to send me an email if you want later, we can talk about it some more. All right, any other questions, anyone else? I see a note from Mark Parker. Mr. Parker, thank you, good to hear you see your name here. What are your views on the importance of this in the sales process? Differentiation. Look, Mark is asking about differentiation. Let me go back to that slide for a second. Mark, you mentioned in your question that it's complete, you agree about trust. Standout is differentiation. I'm not going to go into the whole philosophy around it, but standout is a part of building trust. You have to stand out, and definitely that's part of the differentiation. How do you stand out? Listen, you might have the exact same product as your competition, but you stand out by the relationship, by the emotional relationship you have with them, the personal relationship, right? And I've seen it happening more than once. You know how relationships are crucial. So thank you for your question, Mark. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to sign up, I guess. If you want to stick around and ask some more questions, I'm going to stay around for a few more minutes. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Feel free to send me an email, reach out. As I mentioned earlier, my email is right here, and my website is here. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a true pleasure, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Is Jess still on the call here? Who asked the question? I guess not. All right.